Hey guys, Sniz here, and in this video we're gonna go over my recommended starter for patch 3.15, the Staff Cyclone Chieftain. Now this is usually the point in the guide where I'd show you a montage. But I personally feel that it would be quite unethical for me to show you a montage of the build recorded in patch 3.14. So what I've instead done is I've changed the 6 links in this build to only use 5 links without any awakened gems, and I've also changed my flasks to simulate the flask nerfs. So all the gameplay footage that you're seeing in the background of this guide has been recorded with these changes to simulate the nerfs. Now, although this isn't a perfect simulation of all the nerfs, luckily Path of Building has already gotten an update so we can take a look at the exact numbers. The budget version of this build combined is still able to achieve 3 million DPS post-nerf, and the more endgame expensive version of this build is still able to achieve over 10 million DPS post-nerf as well. Although the build received many nerfs, as pretty much every single build in Path of Exile at the moment, this build funnily enough got a few buffs as well. So this won't be the same powerhouse it was in patch 3.14, but with a little bit of investment, this build will still absolutely obliterate all endgame in a few seconds. It's quite common for melee attack based builds to use either the Ancestral Protector or the Ancestral War Chief, or in some cases both, to buff single target damage in bigger boss fights. Now thanks to the Chieftain Ascendancy, we're able to take the buffs from these totems to a whole new level. So firstly, we're able to leech off of our totems. We pretty much have double buff effect from the buffs provided by totems. We gain increased AoE, enemies near totems take increased damage, enemies near totems deal decreased damage. And as if that wasn't enough, since we're using 2 6 links, the totems themselves end up dealing a ton of damage in the final build. Usually, two-handed melee builds are played with swords or axes, so why do we decide to go for a staff? Well, first off, staves synergize really well with attack-based builds that deal elemental damage. And thanks to the Chieftain Ascendancy, we gain a lot of extra elemental damage, and it's quite easy to convert 100% of our physical damage to fire damage. Now, apart from that, when we go staves, it also allows us to go for a crit-based build. It also allows us to get some block, and it then gives us the possibility of getting Fortify from our cluster jewels, freeing up one of the links in our 6 link. Now, physical Cyclone builds are known to be quite lackluster when it comes to map clear, without the use of Explode. But in this build we incorporate the Shockwave support, sending out a massive AoE Shockwave whenever we hit an enemy, on cooldown of course. Now that combined with Herald of Ash and our synergy with fire and physical damage thanks to our Ascendancy, allows this build to have really good map clear. Now, the crit-based Fire Cyclone Chieftain with a staff is definitely nothing new. If I remember correctly, Mathel did something similar a patch or 2 ago. So why did I decide to revisit this build then? Well, firstly because I feel that this is a really good build that could use a guide, especially for a league start scenario. And secondly, in patch 3.14, we gained access to the Betrayal Staff, the Cane of Kulamak. Now, as with most attack-based builds, your weapon really determines what the DPS outcome of your build is going to be. And although we do have a really good unique option in the Hegemonies era, pushing endgame content on a Hedgies can become a little bit difficult. That usually meant that you would have to invest a lot of Exalted Orbs into getting a rare staff with high physical damage as an upgrade. But thanks to Cane of Kulamak, this is no longer the case. We now have a nice intermediary upgrade between a Hedgies and a mirror to your rare staff. With a well-rolled Cane of Kulamak, I was able to do all the content up until Cyrus 9 without any hassle at all. Now, all in all, this ends up to be a really well-rounded build with amazing map clear thanks to the combo of Shockwave support and Herald of Ash, really good single target able to exceed millions of Shaper DPS thanks to Cyclone, Shockwave and 3 heavily buffed up totems, and the build also is pretty tanky with a few layers of mitigation and decent sustain via leech. For our first Ascendancy, we take Namahu's Flames Advance, converting 50% of our physical damage to fire damage. This combined with Avatar of Fire allows us to convert 100% of our physical damage to fire damage. And then Namahu's Flame also gives us, for a 4-second window out of 10 seconds, 100% of our physical damage as extra fire damage. This is a massive DPS boost window for single target boss fights. For our second Ascendancy, we go for Hinekora Death's Fury. This allows us to leech some of our fire damage. It increases our strength, but most importantly, it covers rare and unique enemies in Ash. Now, when an enemy is covered in Ash, they have 20% reduced movement speed, and they also take 20% increased fire damage. For our third Ascendancy, we take Tukahama War's Herald. Now this allows us to leech a percentage of the damage dealt by our totems, It also gives our ancestral totems increased activation range, but most importantly, it gives us 100% increased buff effect of the buffs provided by our totems. For our final Ascendancy, we take Ahorngui, Moon's Presence, making enemies near our totems deal less damage and forcing enemies near our totems to take increased physical and fire damage. Our totems are then also immune to fire damage, and we gain a little bit of increased area of effect when we have a totem summoned. Without the use of cluster jewels, this is what a typical level 95 passive tree would look like. Now, like I said initially, we are crit based, so we start off by taking a few of the generic crits and staff crit nodes. We're also able to pick up some of the block and increased attack nodes since we're using staves. We also pick up a few increases to generic elemental damage since we are converting all of our damage into fire damage. Since this is still an attack based build, we do pick up a few attack speed and accuracy nodes. As with most PoE builds, we also take all the increased maximum life notables accessible to us. We also pick up a few keystones, the first being Unwavering Stance. This just allows us to avoid stuns completely, with the downside of not being able to evade enemy attacks, but since we're not stacking evade, this downside doesn't apply to us. For the second keystone, we take Glancing Blows. Now this doubles our attack and our spell block chance, while forcing us to take 65% of the damage from the hits that we've blocked. This keystone is typically good on builds with good sustain, in our build that would be Leech, and then builds that aren't amazing at achieving high block numbers without this keystone. Then for our final keystone, we take Avatar of Fire. This keystone converts 50% of our physical, cold, and lightning damage to fire damage, but it comes with the downside of not being able to deal any non-fire damage, which is fine in our build. If you do plan on incorporating a cluster jewel to be able to remove Fortify from your main 6-link and then add in something else, this is what a level 95 passive tree would look like with the use of cluster jewels. In this build, we're able to comfortably fit in an 8 passive large Mason Staff damage cluster jewel. The only mandatory cluster jewel notable that you do want is Overlord. Overlord allows us to gain Fortify on hit. This means that you can remove Fortify support from your main 6-link to gain more damage. Apart from Overlord, other good notables are Martial Prowess and Weight Advantage. The first staff you want to try and get is a Hegemony's Era unique staff. This staff has good physical attack damage and will allow you to farm red tier maps with ease. For a weapon upgrade for a lot more damage, you want to get yourself a good PDPS Cane of Kulamak. Now the modifiers that you want to look out for are increased physical damage and increased attack speed. Apart from that, these canes can roll so many different modifiers. The easiest way to find one that's right for you is to go onto the PoE trade site, type in Cane of Kulamak in the search bar, set your maximum budget, and then once results have been shown, just sort by PDPS. For the Helm slot, you just want to get yourself a rare helmet with good life and resistances. Another basic unique option is a Crown of the Inward Eye, and then as a final endgame version, you want to get yourself a rare helmet with the Warlord modifier. Nearby enemies have reduced fire resistance. For the Helm enchant, you want to get a base with Ancestral Protector totems grant 18% increased attack speed while active enchanted on. For the chest piece, the most important and only mandatory modifier that you want is attacks have increased critical strike chance. This modifier can be found on Elder bases as well as Hunter bases. For the glove slot, we use rare spiked gloves, giving increased accuracy as well as increased attack speed. Apart from that, you just want some life and resistances. For a beginner basic version of the boot slot, you just want to get some life, resistances, and movement speed. If you do want to invest a little bit more into your boot slot to gain more movement speed as well as more damage, you could go for a Tailwind, Elusive, Onslaught on Kill, Movement Speed, Life pair of boots. For the amulet, we use the Hyri's Truth unique amulet. This amulet grants us a level 22 precision, helping out with our hit rate and accuracy. It gives a lot of dexterity, which we need in this build. It also gives a lot of flat physical and cold damage. They both get converted to fire damage. And it also gives critical strike multiplier and reduces precision mana reservation. Getting a rare amulet that's able to beat this amulet is really difficult. For the Amulet Anoint, we pick up Panopticon, increasing buff effect from the buffs granted by our totems, while also increasing their damage. This is a relatively medium investment anoint as it costs a Verdant oil, an Indigo oil, and then an Opalescent oil. For the first ring slot, you want to pick up a rare ring that curses enemies with Assassin's Mark on hit. Apart from that, getting life, resistances, or a little bit of dexterity is also desirable, but you also want to get a ring with an open prefix so you can craft on reduced cost of channeling skills. For the second ring slot, you want to try and get a steel ring with T1 flat physical damage added to attacks on the ring as well. Apart from that, just getting a ring with another open prefix so you can craft on reduced cost of channeling skills will also help out with mana management. If you do have, for example, an additional cursed chest piece, you want to get this ring with the Warlord modifier, curse enemies with flammability on hit. For the belt slot, you just want to pick up a rare with good life and resistances. If you do want to invest a little bit more into the belt, you could go for an Elder Stygian Vice with flat maximum life, increased maximum life, and also the Elder modifier, increased global physical damage. For the rare jewels in this build, you want to get jewels that increase attack speed with staves, and also increase maximum life. And then if you are using a Stygian Vice, you want to pick up Murderous Eye jewels that add flat physical damage to staff attacks and also give some increased attack speed. Since we're using precision, we also gain access to all the precision Watcher's Eyes. Prioritize getting increased attack speed or increased attack damage, and then if you can, increased critical strike multiplier. Now this is usually the part of the build guide where we go over the flasks that I recommend you use, but with all the changes to flasks coming in patch 3.15, I will have to try them out myself before recommending any to you guys. So for now, I am only going to recommend the unique flasks that I think you should use. The first flask that I can recommend is the Lion's Roar Unique Flask. Although it did take a hit in the nerfs, it's still one of the best flasks to use for melee physical builds. Secondly, I recommend you get a Cinder Swallow Unique Flask. This helps out with single target, but also helps out with sustained while mapping. As for the modifier that can be unveiled, I recommend you get one with increased critical strike chance. As for the rest of your flasks, like I said, it's really difficult to say what's going to be important or not. I still think you should prioritize getting a good life flask, instant preferably, with a quicksilver flask for some movement speed, and then some sort of flask to deal with freeze. For our main 6-link, we have Cyclone, linked to Infused Channeling, linked to Shockwave support, linked to Fortify, linked to Fire Penetration, linked to Elemental damage with attacks. Now if you do have the Overlord Cluster Jewel notable, you can switch out Fortify support for Inspiration support. For a more expensive but a more potent version of our 6-link, we still use Cyclone, linked to Anomalous Inspiration, linked to Anomalous Infused Channeling, linked to Normal Shockwave, and then linked to Awakened Elemental damage with attacks and Awakened melee physical damage. For our Totem 6-link, we have Ancestral Warchief and Ancestral Protector, both linked to multiple totem support, fire penetration support, elemental damage with attack support, and melee physical damage support. Now if we want to upgrade this 6-link to a more potent but a more expensive version, we upgrade both elemental damage with attacks and melee physical damage to their Awakened variants, and we switch out fire penetration for Awakened Elemental Focus. For our auras, we have the level 22 precision granted by our unique amulet. We also use Blood and Sand, Herald of Ash, and Herald of Purity. We use Leap Slam as our main movement ability, and we also use Blood Rage to gain some extra attack speed whilst mapping and for single target boss fights. Then finally, we have Wave of Conviction to instantly apply fire exposure, linked to combustion support. Now onto Pantheons. For the Major God, I recommend you go with the Soul of Lunaris to help you out against some projectile damage, but you can also go with the Soul of Arakali to help you out against damage over time. For the Minor Pantheon, it's really hard to beat the Soul of Ralakesh now, since it's one of the only ways that you're able to deal with corrupted blood. For Bandits, I first off on League Start recommend you go with Alira, but then later on I recommend you kill all the bandits for the extra 2 skill points. Now with all the changes happening in patch 3.15, it's quite impossible to say what the ideal and perfect leveling setup for a build like this is going to be. So without giving you a step-by-step guide, I will still give a few tips that should make leveling a little bit easier. I recommend you use whatever good two-handed weapon you find up until the point where you start taking staff nodes on the tree, and then it's probably a good idea to start using staves. As for a skill to play, I recommend you use any good slam or any strike skill that's good for leveling, examples being Ground Slam, Sunder, and Static Strike. A few good auras to use while leveling is Precision, Herald of Ash, Herald of Purity, and Blood and Sand. Also remember to stay away from using Brutality support, as a large portion of your damage is gonna be elemental damage. In Act 3 you gain access to Cyclone. Now I personally recommend that you do not immediately switch over to Cyclone and continue using either the Slam skill or the Strike skill to complete the campaign. If you do want to switch to Cyclone early, buying a unique ring Praxis would help out with the mana cost. Also remember to pick up your Ancestral Protector and Ancestral War Chief, as they are a massive boost to your single target DPS. As always with my guides, we have leveling trees down here, and then we have final endgame with cluster jewels or without cluster jewel versions. In the skill setup, we also have endgame versions with awakened gems, and then basic versions without any awakened supports. When calculating your DPS, remember to take a look at your Cyclone DPS, add that to your Shockwave DPS, and then also take a look at your Ancestral Totem DPS. Take a look at the average between your Ancestral War Chief and Ancestral Protector. Take the average and multiply it by 3 since we have 3 of these up. In the item section, we also have a basic gear setup and then an endgame gear setup. And in the notes section, I still need to add trade links and a little bit of extra information. And there you go, that's the guide, that's all you need to know. With all the uncertainty going into patch 3.15, I truly do believe that this is going to be a really good starter that's going to help you progress the Atlas and get most of your Maven content done. As we progress through this new meta of Path of Exile builds and figure out what works and what doesn't work, I'll be making build guides for those builds that are worth playing. So if you do want to see more builds like this, remember to subscribe so you get notified when the guides come out. And also, I'll be live streaming the entire League Start event over on Twitch. So if you want to hang out while I do that live, link to the stream in the description down below. Now, before I go do some last minute prep before League Start, I am curious to hear what you guys are planning on League starting. With all the meta shifts and changes happening in patch 3.15, I think we might see some really interesting League starters happening this league. So if you are one of those players with a really interesting League start idea that doesn't mind sharing the idea, please let me know in the comment section down below. I am really interested to hear what you're planning on playing. But that's it from me, I'm Sniz, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye. Wait, so you don't know each other? Every single person in South Africa? I don't, Darth. I know 99% of the people in South Africa. There's like 2 people that I don't know though. 2 people. Only 2 people. I've met every single South African person except for 2.